This morning's quote is by the Sufi poet Rumi. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of furniture, still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.
Good morning. I'm most delighted to be with you this morning to talk about opening to the power and mystery of the transcendent in our lives. Thank you for inviting me. And I want to begin this morning by acknowledging that this is a topic that brings up a variety of responses. It might be that you are curious and interested. It might be that you're welcoming of this topic, delighted that it's here. But it also might be, depending on your background, that you bring a certain amount of guardedness. There are many who have found their way to a Unitarian Universalist congregation who come from a religious background in which they felt oppressed, exploited, sometimes abused. They're bringing trauma, and I want to acknowledge that that's so, and appreciate the openness of spirit that allows you to be present. And I hope that you'll find that this talk is fully respectful. I also want to acknowledge that there can be in our highly rational UU world a certain dread of creeping irrationality coming in through the back door. And so I want to say that in my talk this morning, I'm offering not so much a post-rationality, but reason folded into a larger mode of knowing. And here I am offering a sermon, so I'm right here in the front door. I want to offer you an approach to theological understanding that is not opposed to reason, but that expands our modes of knowing. And we certainly can approach the transcendent, the non-rational through reasoned scholarship, and I'd like to begin there. And I'd like to lift up the name of Huston Smith, scholar of world religions, author of The World's Religions. That's sold, I think, over 3 million copies and is foundational in college religious studies programs around the world. Huston Smith believed in the shared wisdom that all religions bring, and that the primary function of religion is to carry the world's wisdom traditions forward. He retired to Berkeley, where he was a speaker and a visiting professor at UC Berkeley. And his wife was a member at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Berkeley when I was a member there also. I was an affiliated minister there for 17 years. And I attended one of Huston Smith's lectures. And he said that post-industrial Western culture is the only culture in the history of the world not to believe in a transcendent, non-material, foundational dimension of reality with which we can be in relationship. With which we can be in relationship. I thought that was remarkable. So I'm speaking of the transcendent here in this talk as a non-material dimension of reality that is actually foundational to the material world. And I'm going to refer to it primarily as source consciousness, though there are other names, but the source from which the material world arises. And there are scientific perspectives that support this. Certainly not all scientists, but it's my understanding, and I assure you science is not my forte, that Max Planck founder of quantum mechanics, father of quantum mechanics, said, I regard consciousness as the primary reality, and I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. And Edwin Schrodinger, famous for the Schrodinger's cat, is the cat dead or alive in the box, both at the same time, said the total number of minds in the universe is one. So if we open to the idea that there is a foundational dimension of reality with which we can be in relationship, then the question is how? There are innumerable ways of being in relationship with the source consciousness of being. And we might even say that the primary problem with religion in our world today is that most religions define their way of being in relationship as the only way, the right way. I'm grateful that Unitarian Universalism doesn't do that. It's certainly one of the reasons that for over 50 years I've been a Unitarian Universalist. But opening to the idea that there might be many ways of being in relationship doesn't help us to see in itself how we might actually pursue that relationship if we're interested in having it. I am. So even within humanist leaning UU culture, and there was a study, I think this was in the 90s, within Unitarian Universalism, trying to locate us theologically. And at that time, about 50% of Unitarian Universalists identified as humanist, and about 50% identified as some variation of more than humanist, mystic, Unitarian Christian. Interestingly, we did not at that time really name Unitarianism and Universalism as theologies, which they are, and I want to say more about that. But I want to say that even in the Unitarian Universalist humanist leaning culture, which I think our culture is, there is a thread of awareness of a non-material dimension of reality with which we can be in relationship. I've given many talks at GA over the years and at district assemblies. And at one of those talks, I honestly can't remember which one, I asked the question, I think there were maybe 300 people in the audience in that room. How many people had experienced in a palpable sense the presence of a deceased loved one? 6 or 7 people raised their hand. Then maybe 3 or 4 more. And one person came up to me afterwards and said, I've never been asked that kind of question in a UU context. I thought it was an interesting question to ask so that we could all be aware that experiences of the non-material transcendent infuse our culture as well. Seems to me appropriate for me to say something about my own personal experience and background so you know where I'm coming from. Emerson said that that was his primary complaint against Unitarian ministers, that they did not open up their own story and lives. So I always try to do that. So I was raised primarily by my father. He was a conservative Republican who claimed to have been born in a 3-piece suit. But he told me that from his earliest childhood, he had had premonitions and experiences of a non-material reality. When he was, I think, 7 years old, he was playing with clay and he made a gravestone with the death of his grandmother, who was in perfect health as far as anyone knew. And it was the next day. And during the night, his grandmother suddenly died. And it shook him deeply. And he began to listen and pay attention. And all of his life, he would have precognitive experiences, often phone calls. He told me once he got a phone call from someone who hadn't called in 30 years, and he picked up the phone and said, "Hello, Joe." And Joe was very surprised. So I was raised to be alert to that. And I had a sense of myself from my earliest life as being both body and spirit. Um, I sometimes related to the story of Peter Pan, that I was kind of flying around the room trying to tie body and spirit together. I didn't have language for it, but I had that image for it from Peter Pan. And when I was 29, during the birth of my second child, I went through a near-death experience. I still don't know what really happened to me physically. I have a memory of a nurse saying with anxiety to the doctor that she was not getting a pulse from me. And what I know that I experienced is that suddenly I was in an altered reality in which I could see everyone in the room, including the baby within me, as streaming particles of golden light. It was as though I could see through the exterior, as though bodies were translucent, and I could see this aura of light and the streaming particles of golden light of which everyone was made. And at the same time, I was flooded with this experience of love. This was before I was a Unitarian Universalist. I had attended, but I had not joined. I really didn't know anything about Universalism in particular. And I was flooded with what I now know is the original Universalist theology, that the universe is flooding you with love all the time. And that's what happened to me. It was both the most personal love I've ever experienced, that every moment of my life was known, and it was also completely impersonal because it was for everyone exactly the same. I hadn't earned it, and I couldn't get rid of it, and neither could anyone else. And that experience, which I didn't talk about for 10 years because I really didn't know what to do with it, has continued to be for me the most real thing that's ever happened to me. So in the same way that you wake from a dream and you say, "Oh, that was so real, but now I'm back in reality." For me, waking life reality is dreamlike compared to that experience. When I got to Star King School for the Ministry, when I was 44, I wanted to study mysticism. I wanted to understand more about the experience I had had. And I learned that mystical experiences are cross-cultural in all cultures of the world, and also cross-historical, found throughout history. The earliest Egyptian cuneiform tablets reference mystical experiences in every culture in the world. And I would say that all the major religions of the world are founded on the basis of some mystical experience of a founder. I think we can include Lao Tse, Moses, Jesus, Mohammed, Buddha. And followers then sort of codify and coalesce the experience of the founding mystic as they understand it into a code of practices and beliefs. And that's where we get religions that take form. But mystical experiences of the transcendent are the norm in many cultures today. In Haiti, as I learned in one of my courses at Star King, if you aren't having mystical experiences of the transcendent, and in West Africa, that's very unusual. People are a little bit sorry for you. So I've come to think of this capacity as a dimension of our humanity that we may or may not develop. And whether or not we develop it seems to have partly to do with, an inborn tendency, our temperament, but it also definitely has to do with cultural encouragement, whether that's there or not. It's worth thinking about. Have you ever been encouraged to consider the possibility of your own mysticism? I'm a student of the work of Carl Jung, scientist and mystic, and who opened me up to the idea that there are four modes of knowing: thinking and feeling, sensation, and intuition. And that none of these modes of knowing offers the same avenue into reality as the other. There's nothing you can say about the taste of French bread that replaces the taste of French bread. You have to taste it yourself. Intuition is a mode of knowing that is sometimes confused with feeling, but it's not the same. I'm going to define intuition as a calm and centered awareness that may accompany a wide range of feelings, but that seems to originate beyond our rational mind and beyond our emotional body. It's a sense of knowing, and now this, and now this. And it sometimes comes quite unbidden. And I invite you to consider how intuition has functioned in your life, moments when you have simply known. Sometimes it's that sense someone behind me is looking at me. You couldn't know that, but you turn, and yes, it is. Sometimes it's the sense that the map says turn left, but you just know you got to turn right. Jung felt that the two primary modes of opening to the transcendent, opening to the intuition that leads us into the transcendent, are through paying attention to our dreams, which has been an important spiritual practice for me for 40 years, and through paying attention to synchronicities, those meaningful coincidences. I had one last week. I was speaking with a teacher who is an important mentor in my life about leaning into the positive, leaning into what is it that we want rather than what we are trying to recover from. And I tuned into a podcast that was opening me to exactly the same concepts on flourishing. And it really felt like a synchronous moment. Jung also felt that we should be aware of the moments when exploration of the unconscious pops up in a way that we were not ready for and did not expect, but that we're invited to look more deeply within. And he gave an example of working with a patient who was resistant to the idea of having an unconscious, but who had had a dream of a golden scarab beetle that was very important. And Jung heard a sound at the window, and he went to the window, and just such a rare beetle was beating on the window. And he opened it and captured it in his hand and brought it to his patient. And that was an important moment of opening in that case. Can we think about the transcendent in a new way? This is challenging for us. We have been immersed in a culture that offers an understanding of the transcendent that's connected to the word God, that is connected to the Judeo-Christian culture, whether we have ever been a member of such a church or not, that has that focus. It's the cultural soup we swim in. So it's a lot to think of a different way of approaching a transcendent. I want to offer you a koan, which, if you are familiar with Zen, is a problem that we can't reason ourselves out of. Imagine a chair. This chair has no back. It has no legs. It has no seat. But you can sit back in it and you will be held. That's the new image of the transcendent I want you to take metaphorically as a new way of thinking about that which we have culturally, collectively called God. And I don't know whether you're familiar with the word panentheism or not, but I want to lift it up for you. It's been an important way for me of understanding the mystery of the transcendent. The idea of panentheism is rather than there being some one-to-one relationship with a God that's out there and you are here, that we are all inside the body of God, the body of the universe. We are inside of a oneness that will not let us go. And it is entirely different to imagine yourself as inside of this alive and conscious oneness. So I want to just invite you to that. Unitarian Universalism is the only religion that is actually named after two theologies. Unitarianism, originally, all is one. Jesus is a brother and a teacher and a spiritual master in the original Unitarian theology, but not different in substance than ourselves. Universalism, the idea that the divine is love, that love is the ground of our being, that is, that there is no hell, also a theology. And it seems to me that we are right on. It seems to me that all is one and that the divine is love. And I would love for us collectively to be more in touch with those theological roots and all the ways that they can blossom. Personally, I view myself as a mystic, a Unitarian Christian. That is, I study the life and teachings of Jesus, and I could have no higher aspiration than to live the principles that Jesus lived by. I'm a universalist. I'm a pagan. I'm very interested in Wicca. I'm interested in the ways in which the divine comes through the divine feminine in so many traditions. And I'm influenced by Taoism and Buddhism, and of course, a humanist too, because humanist belief focuses us on this world and on human potential. And I'm sure there's no Unitarian Universalist who's not grounded there. I have to touch on this important question. Does it matter? Does it matter whether we have experiences of the transcendent or not? And you know, in a very important sense, it doesn't. Because the transcendent, the source consciousness, is, in my experience, in my belief, a force like gravity. It does what it does no matter what you think. There's no divine personality that's looking to be worshiped. Gravity holds you on the planet. It never says, you didn't thank me today. I think I'll just eject you into outer space. And source consciousness also, which we may also call the spirit of life, mystery, divine presence, Holy One, the Tao, the transcendent. It continues, as Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams said, to be the creating, sustaining, transforming power of all that is. It simply rolls the universe and ourselves along. So gravity and the transcendent are available for you without requiring anything of you. And how far from Jehovah are we now? But if you jump off a 3-story building, you will feel the effects of gravity. Not because you're being punished, but because that's the way it works. I call this arguing with gravity. So what's the equivalent of arguing with the transcendent? Is there a way in which you can go against the transcendent that matters? And I would say that there is. My granddaughter asked me this recently, and I thought it was a brilliant question. I hadn't phrased it this way, but I think that the equivalent of arguing with the transcendent in human life is not to become fully who you are. That's the call of the holy, to become the best possible version of you. And you can do that without any sort of religious or spiritual belief. You can do that simply by discovering and using your gifts in the service of life. And when you discover and use your gifts, you will be called to use them in the service of life, because that's the way it works. The flower, the bumblebee, the redwood, your cat are all here to become the best possible version of what they can be, and so are you. And this is what, in my experience, the source energy, the transcendent, the creative consciousness of the universe has created us to do. And it will take you into a mutually beneficial relationship with life, whether you ever acknowledge it in any way or not, if that's how you orient yourself and live. And yet there are benefits, and I want to name those. It is, in my direct experience, possible to feel this conscious energy of love present for you when you invite it in. It's possible to invite it to anchor you in the present moment, to serve as a doorway into radical acceptance and empowered action, and to guide you in re-envisioning your relationships with all with greater compassion, really opening your heart to the flourishing of everyone. I truly believe that from this perspective, we can see that all human action is one of two things. There are only two possibilities. Anything that a human being can do is either an act of love or a cry for love. Those are the only possibilities. It has proven true in my life, as I heard long ago. And I decided to test this out, that God is reliable for everyone who relies on God. And so I have attempted to return again and again, and it's a core spiritual practice, to opening to guidance that I find to be there for me in an intuitive sense. You can phrase it as, what now, spirit of life? What now, inner being? What now, universal consciousness? What now, all that is? But when you ask that question with an openness, in my experience, something will happen. You are embedded in a cosmos suffused with love. And it's just kind of a shame to miss that. I'm going to close as I closed when I spoke at my Star King graduation. They had me be the last speaker. I don't know why, but I did start by saying, I always did like having the last word. And the last word I want to offer to you is the word I offered then. You are at the very moment, at this very moment, held in divine grace, whether you like it or not. Blessings, wonderful to be with you.